So, a new topic, and this one is going to extend on what the book talks about. The book topic is called Are You Saying Supernatural, Paranormal, or Abduction? And uh, these are labels, human labels, and I'm going to expand on them because there are other labels that I didn't talk about at the time I wrote the book that I now talk about often on social media. And so we'll talk about some of those here. But first, let's start with abduction. We need to change and reframe the labels we use around experiences, and there's a reason for this. Most people will call an ET encounter an abduction, and because of that, abduction immediately has an intention and connotation of something malevolent if somebody was abducted. When you're doing this work, start calling them experiences. They are not abductions, they are experiences. And I understand there are the few experiences out there that people have that may be of a abduction like uh, purpose and intention. The majority are not. Far from it. It is statistically, in my opinion, kind of like the scenario of, in human terms, having that happen to you. But we hear a lot about it because it's on the news. We hear that so and so was abducted or taken or disappeared or all this other stuff because it's on the news media. It's the same thing with this term with ET stories, that stories of fear sell. Stories of fear sell. So anything with that term and label sells to people who are in these seeking states of trying to figure out what their experiences are and what the truth is about them. So it's used a lot. It's thrown around in books. It's thrown around in other places just naturally because that's what people have used over the years. But we have to switch that. We have to switch it to experiences or some other term that's comfortable to you because we need to put a positive spin on it to reduce our innate programmed fear of experiences. For a long time, my experiences, as I was remembering them, yeah, I was on medical tables. I had medical experiences where I remember touching the back of my head and seeing blood, seeing uh, medical pod things, and all this other stuff that was very, very traumatizing to me. But when I understood it and when they explained what was happening, and I was at a level of awareness that I could comprehend it, this is very key for those of you watching who think you've had a negative, malicious experience, but aren't at a level of consciousness where you can comprehend it safely or truly understand what was going on because you have innate, you have programmed fear into you. When I could understand what was going on, they explained it to me. I was like, oh, that makes sense. I'm perfectly fine. I understand what happened. Okay, perfectly fine. Like the trauma around the experience made me understand that no, I was not abducted. That this was part of my journey. This was part of essentially what I asked for when signing up for this journey. That my friends are helping us in this awakening process, and this was part of the help I was getting in the awakening process. And all of my fear disappeared in that understanding. But I also understood in that moment that we have to shift that word abduction because abduction makes it sound like my experience was malevolent. Even if I were to describe in detail everything I went through, which I don't, I give little details here and there. If I described what I went through, people would be like, "Oh, that doesn't sound fun. That doesn't sound benevolent." And it's like, no, but it doesn't sound that way because you're reading it, you're hearing it, and you're seeing it with the perspective of this programmed fear or this fear around ETs and experiences. But when you understand what was actually happening, the story actually shifts and you're like, oh, that wasn't at all what it was. So shifting those words of abduction to experiences is very key to using positive terms when doing this work. Supernatural and paranormal. A lot of people call things supernatural and paranormal. That puts them outside of the normal reality. Supernatural means it's outside of the natural world. It's something that can't be explained. Paranormal is the same thing. It's outside of the norm. It's beyond the normal. All of this is natural and normal. There literally is no supernatural no paranormal. Those are human labels that are meant to separate what we experience from academia, from what the standard is, to make them seem outside of reality, to make them seem false, to make them seem fake and made up in our heads and fictions and all that sort of thing. Everything that I do is natural and normal. Every experience I've had is natural and normal, and you can all experience it too. Is something we have to shift with our label usage and reframing how we talk about these beings. Another one that comes up, benevolence versus malevolence. Not everything of, how do I say this? This is one of the topics that isn't in the book either, which is why I'm kind of figuring this out as I talk to my guides right now, how I say this. I did a reel on it recently too. So there are beings of light and dark. Light and dark do not equate good and bad. Light and dark entities, light and dark beings come from source. Does not equate good or bad. There are light and dark realms. Does not equate that realm to good or bad. The idea is light and dark are aspects, yin and yang. That's all it is, yin and yang. It's balance of the universe, light and dark. They are born from source with benevolent intentions and purposes. They aren't necessarily malevolent. Malevolence is a choice. Malevolence, the universe has a tendency towards disorder and chaos. Malevolence is that tendency within an individual soul or being or entity because it's easy. Benevolence takes effort. It takes effort to keep things in a benevolent state, a risen vibration, a state of love and light, and all this stuff. It takes work, which is why malevolence exists, because it's easy. It's easy to fall into that. It's easy to do that. And it exists based on choice because everything has free will. Everything has free will to do what it wants to do. So they make choices. They decide if they're even if they're of a light realm or a dark realm, a light being or a dark being, they decide if they are good or bad. Now, if they do what they're supposed to do, designed to do, etc., that generally means they're of benevolent intention and purpose, because everything with source is designed around benevolent intention and purpose to keep things balanced back and forth with these light and dark aspects. Malevolence is not that. Malevolence is malicious intent and purpose, malevolent intent and purpose, out of balance, out of whack, chaos, disorder, not keeping things balanced. Those are very different things. Light and dark. You can have beings of light and dark realms. You can have angels of light realms. You can have gargoyles of dark realms. They have choice as to whether they are good or bad. Beings of light realms can be bad. Beings of dark realms can be good. They can also be on the other sides of the spectrum, but a lot of people try to equate dark realms, dark beings, death gods and goddesses, these beings associated with the aspects of darkness of the universe. They try to equate that with malevolence. It's not true. They are of benevolent and purpose and intention. They may not be of light. That is a difference. They're not of light, of a light realm, or all shiny and glowy like angels and that sort of thing often are, but they still have benevolent purposes and intentions. Same with light realms. Light realms, a lot of people think, oh, just because it's of light realm, it is benevolent. It's not the truth. They have choice too. They can be of these different places, different choices. So it's very important to understand those labels, that light and dark do not mean those things. The other thing is entity. Entity often conjures up images of something malicious because we're calling it an entity. An entity is not that. An entity is a human label that has connotations with it and that sort of thing. I typically use the word being, an ET being, a Sasquatch being, however it is. I typically use the word, I encountered a being, not an entity. Sometimes I do use the word entity though, because to me it doesn't have the connotation of maliciousness to it that it does for a lot of people. An entity is just what it means at its base level. A being, a person, a soul, something that is quantified. You could even use that word like in regular objects and that sort of thing. It can cross over to many things, but in the work that we do, it's something that's quantified in consciousness as a being. So an entity can be that. But again, like light and dark, an entity is not inherently good or bad. It is just a description of who they are. Other labels, race labels, a lot of beings, you don't call them by their race. They're the race names. We have these race names. For example, Arcturian, Zeta, Pleiadian, all these different race names. These beings are like humans. We don't go around calling them humans. We don't go up to our friends and go, hey, human, that sort of thing. So be aware of labels, because in the human world, we don't call ourselves that. We call us from where we are in what, for us, it's generally geographical. Like, hey, I'm from Jefferson, or, somebody's from China or South America or wherever. They're South American, they're Chinese, they're whoever they are, Brazilian. It's kind of the same with these beings. They don't mind the labels, but it's important to understand that if you see an Arcturian, you can see 10 Arcturians and they all look different. See 10 Zetas and they all look different because they're from different places. They're from different areas. The preconceptions around species names and labels is something to get past, because they are very much like humans, where they exist on other planets. They've spread out. Some of them have different evolutions. Some of them have told me, like, we are an evolution of a Zeta. We are an evolution of XYZ. We are a hybrid even of XYZ. And so we can say Zeta like I do in my writing, because we need the labels in writing. Unfortunately, it's a human thing. But to understand that the labels are not meant to make preconceptions of who they are. It's very important. You may meet other beings and to not have a preconception of who they are based on a species label or anything like that. Excuse me. So this whole idea of labels of Sasquatches were coming into my head while I was choking there for a minute. This whole idea of labels, one of the ones I like to use is Sasquatch. A lot of people will come and say, I've seen Sasquatch. I know immediately to be like, are you sure? Are you sure you've seen Sasquatch? I don't mean that in a way to dismiss the experience. Let me be very clear with that. The reason I say that, are you sure you saw Sasquatch? If you can't communicate and you didn't take the time to communicate with it, how do you know it was Sasquatch? You say it's Sasquatch because you have this label and preconception that beings in the woods who are walking around, who are taller, who have hair, who are ape-like in the woods are Sasquatch. So people say, I saw Sasquatch or I saw Bigfoot. The question is, did you really see Sasquatch? The reason I ask that is there are beings who look like Sasquatch but aren't Sasquatch. There are troll-like beings. There are ETs from other worlds who have likenesses that can easily be confused in the woods as those. There are wolf humanoids that if you don't have the angle right and you see them walking around, some of the bigger, more muscular ones that are taller, if they're in the woods or you see them somewhere, you could assume they were a Sasquatch. And this is why the labels are important. If you don't know what they are, to be careful labeling what your experience is tied to. The reason is this, and you can kind of understand it from before, but this is the example I use. If you have never been to the North American woods, you walk in and you don't know anything about any type of wildlife we have. You walk in at night and you see something and it skitters by, and it's big. It's the size of like maybe a big cat or a small dog. And you're like, oh my God, I saw this thing. You go back in and it chases you or something, and you go back with a story to town and you start telling people the story of, I saw this thing, it had black and it was white stripes and all this other stuff. And you start telling the story of this thing with maybe gray fur, black, maybe some white on it, and you give it a name and you say it's a raccoon. And you're like, everybody's like, oh my God, there's raccoons that exist in the woods. We've never seen one. What is that? And they start going into the woods and they start seeing these things at night, these animals running around. And they're like, oh my God, I saw one too. And it was this big and that sort of thing. But then you start legitimately going out and identifying what you're seeing, experiencing, and working with. And you find out one person's seeing a raccoon. One person is seeing a skunk. One person is seeing a badger. One person's seeing a feral dog. One person's seeing a wild cat. Like, none of them are experiencing the same thing, but they're all labeling it a raccoon because they didn't know about the other ones. They didn't know the other ones existed. And so everything gets dropped in to this idea of it was a raccoon when it wasn't, when most of them were seeing something else. But because of the storytelling, because of the preconception of this one raccoon story going around, not preconception, well, preconception, yeah, because people had that preconception in their mind when they experienced it, but because of the, I'm not getting the right word here, but because of the way everybody knew the story of the raccoon, they were able to say, I had an experience, it fits this label, therefore it is that thing, when in fact it was something completely different. And that's important moving forward with experiences, because you never truly know what you're working with or who you're talking to if you don't ask the questions. If you don't ask the questions and feel them out and actually understand the experience. You may have seen a Sasquatch. You might have really seen a Sasquatch, or you might have seen a troll. Two completely different things. And trust me, they are completely different in the ways that they act and the ways that they interact with humans. Completely different. But the experiences are valid. They're just completely misunderstood because of the label of the Sasquatch. So those are things to think of moving forward. You know, the idea of abduction versus experience, supernatural, paranormal versus natural and normal, light and dark versus benevolence and malevolence. What was another? We said entity versus being, and the idea of racial labels, species labels, experience labels, and that sort of thing. It's very important to understand that moving forward with your experience, not to drop something into the bucket of a label because it fits that, but to actually hold it outside until you truly understand the experience and can say, yes, 100% Sasquatch. And what I say with Sasquatch is the beings who I call Sasquatch tell me they are called Sasquatch. I've had 12 or 13 experiences with them, not experiences, but different Sasquatches that I've worked with. One of them has asked to be called Bigfoot because they prefer that term. The others all call themselves Sasquatch. And I've had experiences with trolls and other things that I could easily see being dropped into the Sasquatch bucket. So just keep that in mind moving forward. Labels, preconceptions, the stories that are out there, do not let them define what your experience is. It is up to you to figure out what your experience is and help share that with the world so people know that all these other beings exist, and that they're not to be defined by the labels too. So thank you again for watching. You all have my deepest gratitude, love, and light, and we'll get to the next section here in a few minutes.